If you like the look of the first generation BMW Mini, then you probably quite like the look of the second version as well. On the face of things, not a huge amount has changed for the third generation, but there are significant changes, even if you can't see them from out here. Now, although there are some really fundamental changes to this car, the most important thing remains completely unaltered, and it is a really enjoyable car to drive. The steering is very sharp to respond, there's loads of grip around corners, and you can chuck it around with confidence and have a lot of fun doing so. If you go for the 2-litre petrol version in the Cooper S, then it is a proper little hot hatch. You get from 0 to 60 in under 7 seconds, and it sounds fantastic too. The more sensible versions, like this 3-cylinder 1.5-litre petrol, are still fun to drive, as is the diesel. More importantly though, they are quiet as well. 3-cylinder engines can be really thrummy and send a lot of vibration and noise into the cabin, but that's really not the case here for either of those two engines. There is just one niggle with how the Mini drives, and that is the ride. It is a solvable problem though. If you go for smaller wheels or the optional adaptive suspension, then it is much smoother and is much better than Minis of old. Now that sporty feeling continues in the Mini even when you are sat still, because these seats are very comfy and supportive. There's also a lot of adjustment on them, even if it is a little bit fiddly in some ways to do it, and the dials on the steering wheel go up and down when you move it around, so you should be able to see them regardless of how tall or short you are. One quirk though is this armrest. It gets in the way pretty much no matter what size you are, so most people will spend most of the time with it folded away. The Mini is trying to keep the style of the classic Mini alive in its modern cars, hence this great big retro looking dash. Now, at first glance it does look a little bit all over the place, but as much as anything that is to do with the loads of different types of materials on display, and all the really important controls are very easy to find, like these big chunky dials down here. And all these materials do feel pretty good though, and the Mini does justify its hard-earned premium reputation in here. One absolutely brilliant thing about the Mini though is this infotainment system. It is about as good as it gets on a car this size. The problem is you don't get all this as standard. You get a much more basic orange lit version on the entry-level cars, and then there's a 6.5-inch colour screen the next step up, and then at the top of the range you get this 8.8-inch colour version. And this comes with all the bells, whistles, lights when you play around with the heating system, sat nav, even a 20 gig hard drive to store loads of your music. It is absolutely fantastic. You can also, as an option, spec this iDrive style controller down here, which means you can do everything without taking your eyes off the road. The only other issue with the front part of the Mini's cabin is the view over your shoulder. That rear chunky styling means it's quite tricky to see out. Although drivers and front seat passengers should be able to get comfy in the Mini, that is not exactly the case if you end up in the back. Getting in is not something you can do very gracefully, and once you're back here, now there is a little bit more room than in previous generations of the Mini, and there is enough headroom and legroom, but that's about it. If you're a fully grown adult, then short journeys are all you're really going to want to do back here. Now, the boot is slightly small when you compare it to similarly sized cars like the Audi A1 and Citroen DS3, but it is a nice even shape either side, and it does have a couple of tricks up its sleeve. You can get this adjustable boot floor, which folds up to reveal a good amount of underfloor storage, and then it can be hauled up so that you get a nice flat entry lip, and when you drop the seats, it gives you a totally flat loading bay. Now, the Mini hatchback is a desirable car, and Mini knows this, and this means two things. First of all, it means it's quite expensive to buy in the first place, and secondly, it means that you're going to struggle to get much in the way of a discount when it comes to haggling with your dealer. However, that does not mean that it is an expensive car to run. It's very competitive when it comes to CO2 emissions, which means it's very affordable when it comes to all the related taxes. So it's quite cheap to run as both a private car and as a company car. Now, the fuel economy does look good on paper. The petrol versions haven't done that well when it comes to our true MPG tests. Also, because it's such a desirable car, people are going to be willing to pay a little bit more for second-hand versions, so it's going to be worth a bit more when you come to sell it. And this also means that lease rates will be a little bit cheaper. The Mini has made its engine and trim range really simple or really complicated depending on which way you look at it. Every trim comes with its own engine, so the higher up the range you go, the more performance you get. So the most important thing to consider actually is the option packs. We would recommend taking a look at the Pepper pack. That brings a few crucial things: climate control, auto lights and wipers, variable boot floor, and those funky little lights on the dashboard. The Chili pack also looks tempting and adds a load of visual tricks, etc., and sports seats, but it is quite expensive, so adds a fair amount onto that already hefty price tag. So the Mini hasn't changed huge amounts visually over the years, but there is more than enough about it to make it a fantastic all-rounder. It is superb to drive, and that interior is really interesting without being too much of a nightmare to live with or sit in. Yes, there are more practical and cheaper alternatives out there, but that high list price doesn't tell the whole story, and it does a lot to justify your investment. For more information, search for Mini on whatcar.com, but while you're here, do click subscribe and stay up to date with all of our latest video road tests.